Okay. So, as I said in my email this morning, I'm saying conservative Judaism's evolving attitude towards mixed marriage, the next frontier, ? And the reason that I'm saying that is because, within recent memory, let's say from the time that I started rabbinical school, there were two big arguments within the conservative movement that in both cases, people said, oh, if this goes through, it'll split the movement, right? Nobody ever said, if this doesn't go through, it'll split the movement, but as if both sides of the debate don't have principles that are important to them. But the first one was the question of whether women could be ordained as rabbis and cantors, which was resolved. A decision was made in '83 that they could. The first JTS ordained the first woman rabbi from JTS in '85, and then in the early part of this century, the debate was over whether LGBT people could be ordained again as rabbis and cantors, and whether conservative rabbis could officiate at same-sex weddings. And just to show like my own evolution, I would say in the early 90s, I attended a conference at JTS that was organized by a group that was specifically organized to oppose the ordination of gays and lesbians. And as recently as the early 2000s, I said, the conservative movement decides to ordain gays and lesbians, I will lead the movement. And by 2006, I was giving a sermon, a high holiday sermon in favor of the ordination of gays and lesbians, right? So people's positions can evolve and probably, given the fact that, pretty much everybody in the class other than Barnaby is older than me, that evolution is not surprising, is not shocking, right? I mean, we all grew up in an era where, homosexuality was shameful, right? And we live in an era where it is accepted as just a normal expression of sexuality. But so I personally believe that the debate over intermarriage is the next debate that people will say will split the movement. I offer no prediction. I really offer no prediction, but I want to trace a little bit of the history, and then discuss kind of what's been going on more recently. And the history, as somebody who really likes history, the history is really fascinating. Well, I won't even editorialize anymore, other than to say it's fascinating. Okay, so you've all heard me talk about the Law Committee, right? The Law Committee, which is formally known as the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, determines the halachic positions of conservative Judaism, with the caveat that the rabbi of a synagogue is the Mara Da'atra, is the halachic authority for that congregation, and is not obligated to follow the Law Committee decisions, with certain exceptions. Okay, having said that, I mean, as again you've heard me say, the only time in my rabbinic career that I specifically authorized something that was contrary to the Law Committee was at the beginning of the pandemic, when I said we could do our services on Zoom on Shabbat, which at the time was contrary to law committee position. Within a few weeks, they revised their position. I felt it was still more stringent than it needed to be, but it was also something that we could live with. And so, I strengthened up our practices a little bit, and now we're in compliance. But clearly, that was not an obligatory ruling. I did not, have any fear about saying we're not gonna follow it. Okay, but there are certain things that are actually obligatory rulings. At any rate, so I want to look at a little bit of the history of law committee rulings. Okay, in 1941, 1944, 1955, and 1959, okay, the law committee ruled that an intermarried Jew cannot be a member of a conservative synagogue, right? So as late as 1959, the law committee said an intermarried Jew can't even belong to the shul, right? Which, in retrospect, I have to say I find that shocking. But it's a fact. Okay, in 1963, there was a slightly less hardline ruling that a rabbi should seek to dissuade a Jew from intermarrying and try to help the family to prevent their family member from intermarrying. But if it nevertheless occurs, the Jewish spouse can be a member if there is a definite agreement to raise the children as Jews. Okay, and it's important to note that at the time, the overwhelming number of mixed marriages were Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women, right? So that therefore the definite agreement to raise the children as Jews also meant that the children would have to be formally converted at some point, or because from the perspective of the conservative movement, they're not Jewish otherwise, right? So it's not merely kind of lip service, right? The non-Jewish spouse is not a member of the synagogue, not entitled to high holiday seats, cannot be a member of the men's club or the sisterhood, and the Jewish spouse of a non-Jew may not be a board member, may not chair a committee of the shul, and cannot receive any special honors. Okay, now it doesn't define special honors, but I guess, man of the year or something like that. The Jewish spouse of a non-Jew, according to the 63 ruling, could not receive those honors. Okay, and actually we went 19 years without any further rulings on the question of intermarriage, and then in 1982, the Rabbinical Assembly put in what's known as a standard of rabbinic practice. Okay, a standard of rabbinic practice means it is obligatory. Okay, and if you violate a standard of rabbinic practice, you can be kicked out of the Rabbinical Assembly. Okay, and it's not just an idle threat. Rabbis have been kicked out of the Rabbinical Assembly for officiating at intermarriages, but what is more common is that the rabbi resigns from the Rabbinical Assembly before they can be kicked out. But that's what a standard of rabbinic practice means. It's not it's not merely like highly recommended, it's actually obligatory. Okay, and in 1982, they put in a standard of religious practice that a conservative rabbi may neither officiate nor attend an intermarriage, and a rabbi may not officiate at a purely civil marriage between two non-Jews. Okay, now, I actually violated one and almost violated another. My brother, I mean, I refer to her as my brother's ex-wife. That's technically not true. They're still legally married so that she can get health insurance from his job and so on and so forth, but they've been separated for, 15 years or more. And she is a Roman Catholic, and they got married in 1996, I believe. And she is Catholic, and I had to really think through, what am I going to do about, am I going to go to my brother's wedding or not? Right. And so I sat down. At the time, I was on the faculty of what was then called the University of Judaism, is now called the American Jewish University, where the West Coast rabbinical school of the conservative movement. And I sat down with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, who is the rector of the school, and at the time was head of the law committee. And if you've taken any of my classes on other ethical issues, I've referred to him. He's probably the greatest medical ethicist within the conservative movement, and one of the top scholars of Jewish bioethics in the world. And we looked at the standard of rabbinic practice, and we concluded that by the letter of the law, I could not attend the ceremony, but I could attend the reception. Okay, so that's what I decided to do. And then now it's relevant to point out that my brother's wedding was at a bed and breakfast on Block Island, and it was on a Saturday afternoon. So I was staying at the bed and breakfast, and I was able to watch the ceremony from the window of my room, but technically I wasn't there. Okay, and then at the very end of the processional, I said to myself, this is ridiculous. And I went downstairs and I took a seat in the very back row. And were I not telling this story, and had I not told this story, really nobody but my brother and the officiant would have even known that I was there, because I was literally in the back row. But I decided that it was ridiculous. Oh, but I skipped a step. So, as I was trying to figure out what I could do, I called Rabbi Joel Myers, who at the time was the executive vice president of the Rabbinical Assembly, meaning so the chief, paid person in the RA. And I asked him, Joel, can I really be kicked out of the RA for going to my own brother's wedding? And he said to me, and this is 25 years ago, I remember what he said word for word. He said, listen to me very carefully. I cannot tell you that you can go. I can tell you that in order to be kicked out of the RA, somebody would have to bring you up on charges, and it is inconceivable to me that anyone would bring you up on charges for attending your brother's wedding. But I cannot tell you that you can go. All right, so, right, pretty clear, right? I had a similar conversation this morning about a different but analogous question. So I did go. Now, the purely civil part, I mean, that was not very well publicized, and I think it's still not very well publicized. So when I was the Hillel director at AU, I was living in DC, and my brother was also living in DC. He was working for Freddie Mac, and he lived like 2 blocks away. And one of his best friends, who I knew slightly, I mean, we'd gone to a concert together or something, was getting married. And he said that, now this was before like everybody was spiritual but not religious, but he said, I'm spiritual but not religious. I'd like to have some sort of, my fiance and I would like to have something spiritual. Would you do our wedding? He wasn't Jewish. And I said, yeah, sure, I think so. Let's talk about it. Okay. And then when I sat down with them, and I had never met his fiance, well, his fiance was not Jewish, but her father was Jewish. Okay. So halachically, she's not Jewish. She does not consider herself Jewish, but she has a Jewish father and a Jewish sounding last name. Okay. And I said, this just is not going to pass the smell test, right? It's going to appear as if I'm officiating in an intermarriage, even though I'm not. So I said, I can't, you really need to find somebody else. So I didn't do it, but I didn't do it because I thought it might look like I was performing an intermarriage. Not because I knew I wasn't actually allowed to do it. I only found that out later. Anyway, so that was 1982. The standard of rabbinic practice comes in 1984. There is a split in the law committee. And by the way, I mean, law committee rulings do not have to be unanimous. And it's not like a court where, like, you have a ruling and a dissent, but the ruling is authoritative. You could have a multiplicity of opinions, and there are 25 members of the law committee, and any opinion that gets 6 votes is an official position of the law committee, and can be followed. So I don't know what the exact vote was, but there was a split in the law committee, 1984. About whether an intermarriage you could have an aliyah, right? In other words, there was a ruling that said yes and a ruling that said no, 1984. Okay, 1987, the law committee says that the reception for an intermarriage may not be held in the synagogue. Okay, and for this, I mean, if you go to the New York area, there are a lot of shuls that have they have a nice ballroom, and they have an official caterer, and they get a lot of income from weddings that take place in the shul that have nothing to do with the shul. But the law committee said no, a reception for an intermarriage cannot take place in the shul. Okay, and then in 1989, a ruling of the law committee, it was adopted by a vote of 8-4. I don't know where the other 13 members were, but by 8-4, the shul may not issue congratulations on an intermarriage. The shul may not issue congratulations on the birth of a non-Jewish child, and the shul cannot accept donations in honor of either of the above, right? So if we were to follow that ruling, and we had members and they had a non-Jewish grandchild born, we could not say Mazel Tov on the birth of your grandson. We could not accept donations. And again, this is 1987, not 2000 BCE. In 1997, by a vote of 17 in favor, 0 against, and 1 abstention, congregations and Solomon Schechter day schools may not engage or employ any individual who is intermarried for a position in which he or she may serve as a Jewish role model. This specifically includes, but is not limited to, rabbis, cantors, educators, teachers of all age groups and subjects, youth workers, and executive directors. All right, which when they say teachers of all, that means a Solomon Schechter school, by this ruling in 1997, okay, with no opposition and only one abstention, an intermarried Jew could not be a math teacher at a Solomon Schechter school, right? Because it says teachers of all subjects, okay? And also in 1997, I mean, I took a position in 97 as the rabbi of the Conservative Shul in York, Pennsylvania. And I discovered that if the synagogue sent mail to a married couple and one of the spouses was not Jewish, it was addressed only to the Jewish spouse. Okay, and I don't know whether Kehillat Shalom ever had that policy. They did. We did.
We
okay.
did.
Okay. I came in and I said, this is like gratuitously insulting. I had no authority, but I said, we're not doing this anymore. From now on, we're addressing the mail to both members of the couple, not just the Jewish member of the couple. I mean, it's one thing, you know, however you feel about intermarriage, but it doesn't mean you have to be gratuitously insulting. So I, you know, unilaterally, without any authority to do so, changed that policy. Okay. In 2013, the question was brought to the law committee whether a non-Jew could be honored with opening the ark. Okay, and it was the vote was 11 in favor, 8 in favor, 12 opposed, 4 abstaining. But with 8 in favor, it's a legitimate law committee option that they may. Okay, so here is some wording from that ruling. Conservative congregations across the country agree on the need for finding a way to honor non-Jews, especially those involved in the life cycle events of Jews. Some matters, like reading the prayer for peace, are clearly permitted, while others, such as reciting an aliyah, are clearly forbidden. Opening the ark falls in between, where the symbolic meaning may well vary from community to community. Communities vary greatly in the way such involvement by a non-Jew would be perceived. For some, it will be taken as a welcoming act that will encourage conversion and openness. For others, it may be experienced as a leadership act in the service, implying a part in the covenant. These local considerations should be weighed seriously prior to any ritual changes. All right, I'm going to stop here for a minute. Because I'm curious. I mean, maybe I shouldn't even ask, but what do you think about that ruling, about allowing a non-Jew to open the ark, you know, to have the honor of opening the ark during the service? Nobody has an opinion. This is an odd group of Jews, if nobody has. Yes, Stan.
I was opposed to it when we discussed it in the ritual committee. It's a part of the service. What we wound up agreeing to is that a non-Jew could participate after the service in things like an English reading from the Bima.
Right. Anyone else? I mean, that's my position too. I mean, I think that the general rule that I have is that a non-Jew should not be allowed to do anything in the service that implies they are a Jew, or that clearly only a Jew can do, right? Clearly only a Jew can have an aliyah, right? Because you have to be able to be counted for the minyan to have an aliyah, and we don't count the non-Jew for the minyan, right? So clearly only a Jew can have an aliyah. Clearly only a Jew could, lead Psuke de Zimra if we ever went back to having Psuke de Zimra again, right?
Exactly.
But reading the prayer for peace, not a problem, right? Reading the prayer for the United States, not a problem. Reading the prayer for Israel, a little bit iffier in my eyes. I wouldn't say, categorically forbidden, right? Because there are certainly non-Jews who are pro-Israel. Although I don't know that I would give John Hagee or Donald Trump the honor of leading that prayer either. But there are also, roughly 2 million non-Jewish citizens of the state of Israel, right? So I couldn't say categorically it's forbidden, but I wouldn't be super comfortable with it. And when I have, and these days, the majority of bar bat mitzvah families have non-Jewish relatives, usually non-Jewish grandparents or non-Jewish aunts and uncles. And they say, well, what can they do? And I say, the prayer for the country, the prayer for peace, for sure. You could find a reading from the back of the book, but, they say prayer for Israel, like, if you really, really, really need it, let's talk about it. But I would rather not. Yeah, Mike.
At Kehillat Shalom, we were trying to market ourselves as welcoming, and so intermarried couples were welcome. And yet, when we had our executive director Judy, if there was a birthday, she would not allow the listing of the non-Jewish spouse with congratulations in the newsletter. And she drew these obvious distinctions. If a intermarried couple joined the shul, they joined it as a single because the other person couldn't be a member, and stuff like that, which was obviously designed to say you are not welcome here. If there was anything we could do about it, we would, but in the meanwhile, here's our rules. Right. And it raises a really big question. And as you spoke, it raised a really big question, on what should the law committee, or more importantly, the conservative movement, base decisions on. You said that the important questions twice were, but it will split the movement. Who cares? Why would anybody with an important personal issue care if they had to walk away from this movement, which is bureaucracy as opposed to religion? I don't understand that.
Well, look, I'm not asserting that it would. And obviously, look, all right, if it's 1982 and I'm a woman and I want to be a conservative rabbi, I don't really care that me becoming a conservative rabbi will split the movement, right?
Exactly, sure.
If I am, a gay person in 2003 and I want to become a conservative rabbi, I also don't care, right? But if I am the treasurer of the United Synagogue, I do care. And I think that, because look, to me, all right, there are certain issues that are clearly halachic, and as long as we say we are a halachic movement, okay, which we do, which we aren't, but we say that we are, we have to operate within the bounds of halakha. Okay, so let's look at the question of listing the birthday of a non-Jewish spouse of a Jew in the newsletter. Okay, is there a seif in the Shulchan Aruch that says you may not list the birthday of a non-Jewish spouse of a Jew in the shul newsletter? Certainly there is not, right? However, halachically, there is in fact no such thing as marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew, right? So that halachically, the spouse of the non-Jewish spouse of a Jew is not their spouse. It's just the person that they're living with and, having sex with and having kids with, which kids may be or may not be Jewish, depending on, whether the biological parent is the mother or the father. But, so could you make the case that recognizing that relationship is a violation of halakha? You could make that case. I mean, from my perspective, I would not want to make that case, right? Because I think it is gratuitously insulting and unwelcoming, and that the cause of Judaism is, I don't see how, forget even conservative Judaism, right? I think that, look, I personally think, and if you look at every measure of Jewish practice, conservative Jews are higher on the scale than Reform Jews, right? More likely to keep kosher, more likely to go to shul, more likely to light candles, more likely to say Kiddush, more likely to give to the Jewish Federation, more likely to have visited Israel, okay? Right? So the cause of Judaism is not served by telling intermarried Jews to take a hike or join the Reform Temple, right? But the question is, should we violate halakha? No. But should we say that decisions which are not halachic do not need to be made into halachic decisions when there's no halachic prohibition? Also no, right? There's no black letter prohibition against addressing mail to both members of the couple, right? So, that's where I come down on these kind of questions. If I want to play the devil's advocate, I could construct the opposite argument, but I have no interest in that, right? So anyway, so up until 2015, USY, United Synagogue Youth, our youth movement, had a policy that any officers at any level, from the chapter level on up, were not allowed to date non-Jews, okay? And if you were a USY officer and you dated a non-Jew, you had to turn yourself in and quit that office. So that was the old policy. It is expected that leaders of the organization will refrain from relationships which can be construed as interdating, which frankly, I don't even know what that means, can be construed as interdating. But the new policy adopted in 2015 says the officers will strive to model healthy Jewish dating choices. These include recognizing the importance of dating within the Jewish community and treating each person that they were created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Okay, so it's still like held up as a desideratum, but not like an absolute prohibition. Okay, in 2017, the United Synagogue changed its bylaws. Okay, because up until 2017, a non-Jew could not be a member of a United Synagogue congregation. Now, there are lots of United Synagogue policies that are not necessarily observed, right? And they're certainly not like the United Synagogue doesn't have its own police force to investigate whether, but officially a non-Jew could not be a member. But in 2017, they changed the bylaws. And you may remember actually that we had an internal discussion about this, right? Because in order to change the bylaws, they had to get a majority of affiliated congregations to agree, right? So we had to vote on this, one vote as a congregation, and my position, which I articulated then, was that we should support this bylaws change because it's permissive, right? It does not require us to change our bylaws, but it allows us to change our bylaws, or allows any congregation to change their bylaws if they wish, right? That it's permission is not a requirement. So, and it did pass, I mean, quite handily too. United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism supports every affiliated Kehillah in developing its own criteria for membership. USCJ, as a valued and trusted partner, is committed to assisting welcoming, vibrant, and caring Jewish communities to fully engage the spiritual gifts of all community members. We celebrate the diversity among and within our Kehillot and encourage the engagement of all those who seek a spiritual and communal home in an authentic and dynamic Jewish setting. We call on all of our Kehillot to open their doors wide to all who want to enter. Okay, so again, verbiage that it's very pretty. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but it certainly means that, you could let a non-Jewish spouse be a member if you were so inclined. Okay, so in the summer of 2017, this issue burst open. There was a very well-respected rabbi in Philadelphia, Seymour Rosenblum. He was retired as rabbi emeritus of his shul. His stepdaughter was engaged to be married to a non-Jewish man. She pleaded with him to officiate at her wedding. He said that he would, but he also sort of like made a big public deal about it. And he was kicked out of the RA. At the same time, two other fairly prominent conservative rabbis, both of them in New York City, Amichai Lau Levi and Rolando Matalon, both of them, they are JTS ordained rabbis who serve unaffiliated but conservative leaning congregations, I guess is the best way to put it. And they both announced that they were going to start officiating at intermarriages. They understood that this was inconsistent with a rabbinical assembly, a standard of rabbinic practice, and they were not going to wait to be kicked out. They both resigned. But since then, there really has, I mean, to my surprise, maybe, it hasn't really bubbled up very much since then. In October 2017, the heads of all of the organizations of conservative Judaism, so JTS, the Ziegler School, the United Synagogue, the Rabbinical Assembly, put out a pastoral letter, and they said the following, and to me, I mean, the pastoral letter, I find it really spot on. Honoring the integrity of both partners in a wedding, and for the sake of deepening faithful Jewish living, rabbinic officiation at weddings is restricted to a marriage between two Jews. We also recognize the precious personal good of finding a loving partner, and that all people can benefit from access to Jewish wisdom and community. So we call upon all conservative rabbis and congregations to foster deep and loving relationships with all couples, and to create a rabbinic relationship that is broader and deeper than simply the moment of officiation. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically says, you know, that not being able to officiate the wedding does not and should not preclude a relationship with the couple, and even being happy for the couple. In other words, I'm really happy that you found a great spouse. And it's fantastic that you have found a great spouse, and I want you to have a great and long and successful marriage. But as a conservative rabbi, I can't be your officiant. Doesn't mean I can't be your friend and, you know, be happy for you. And it also says, look, you know, we should recognize the integrity. In other words, we're dealing with adults, right? And if people don't want to convert to Judaism, we shouldn't pressure them to do so, right? Just to, you know, get our rubber stamp on their marriage. People, you know, are adults, they have autonomy, and we should recognize that autonomy. Okay, so now, at the same, more or less at the same time, there was a blue ribbon commission of the RA to look at the question of the prohibition of rabbinic attendance at intermarriages. Okay, because there was some question whether that had ever actually legally been adopted as a standard or not. There's a certain procedure, and nobody could find any record that this had ever been passed by a convention. Moreover, I mean, as you can kind of guess from my recounting my conversation with Joel Myers, the policy was on the books, but it was never enforced. Okay, but at the same time, the fact that it was never enforced was not necessarily well known by everybody. Okay, and so we had, and I remember this very clearly, we had regional meetings to discuss this question. And so we had a regional meeting, I'm pretty sure it was at B'nai Israel, and you know, somebody from the RA says, well, you know, this was never really enforced. And one of the rabbis said, you know, and it was sort of like made known through the grapevine that it was not enforced. And one of the rabbis said, I really wish I had known 20 years ago that this policy wasn't enforced. Because I didn't go to my brother's wedding and he hasn't spoken to me in 20 years. And he was pissed, right? And I would be too, right? Because I did go to my brother's wedding, right? Because, you know, the answer that I got was, I can't tell you that you can go, wink, 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 right? But, you know, other people didn't ask the question, right? So at any rate, it is now permissible for a conservative rabbi to attend an intermarriage, but not to officiate, right? And then they had to like define what it means to officiate. And it means to like have a speaking part in the ceremony or sign any paperwork. Okay, so like I couldn't like sign the marriage license even if somebody else did the ceremony, right? But I would, I mean, I have not actually been invited, but if I were invited, I would go, I mean, as long as it wasn't too far away. Um, if I had a relationship with the Jewish partner. But the question is whether that really serves a purpose. And I think it does serve a purpose if you've really, if you have a relationship with a close relationship, either with the parents or with the kid themselves, right? But the fact of the matter is, so I signed up on a lark more than anything else. There is this referral service called Unorthodox Celebrations, okay, where if you're looking for a rabbi for your wedding, they make referrals, and they send it, as long as you're like a legitimately ordained rabbi and it's in the catchment area of this couple, they'll send you the request, okay? And I would say the overwhelming majority of requests are for a rabbi to co-officiate with a priest or a minister, and most of the weddings are on Shabbat, right? So, so even, because there are always all kinds of proposals, well, like it gets back to the 1963 ruling, right? Which says that, an intermarried Jew could be a member of a conservative shul if there's a definite agreement to raise the kids as Jewish, right? So now there's always once in a while there's a proposal, well, maybe we should allow conservative rabbis to officiate at an intermarriage if there's a definite agreement to raise the kids as Jewish, right? But the fact of the matter is, couples don't necessarily want to have that commitment, I would say, extorted from them. I mean, in many cases, they want to raise the kids in both religions, or neither. And then when they're 18, they'll magically decide what religion they want to be, right? But to kind of extort a commitment, and we know, like in the Catholic Church, that's the deal, right? I mean, and although technically, because my brother was married by a Catholic priest, the Catholic person has to promise to do everything that is solely in their power to see that the kids are raised Catholic. All right, so my sister-in-law asked, okay, so I have to promise to do everything solely within my power to raise our kids as Catholic. What if Peter doesn't agree? And the priest said, well, then it's not solely within your power, is it? Right? And that, which is true, right? But, I don't know, to make people promise things that they don't intend to fulfill, to me, it just doesn't sit well, right? So personally, I mean, I agree with the prohibition on officiating, okay? And the reason that I agree with it is that, I mean, it does not particularly bother me if other conservative rabbis reach a different decision. The problem is that in my experience, once something becomes permissible, it soon becomes obligatory, right? In other words, you could not, I mean, I don't know any conservative, like in theory, right? When we decided to ordain gays and lesbians, right? It was, you can, but you don't have to, right? But I can't, or, same-sex marriages, you can, but you don't have to, right? But the reality is that now you do have to, right? And there are, almost, and when the conservative movement became egalitarian or allowed egalitarianism, right? It was, oh, you can, but you don't have to, right? I bet there aren't half a dozen non-egalitarian conservative synagogues left in the whole country. All right, which in my opinion is not necessarily a bad thing, right? But the point is that once something becomes, in other words, it's easier for me to say to a couple, I'm not allowed. Okay, this is not a reflection on you. It's not a reflection on you. I wish you only the best, and I do, and I'm happy for you both, but I'm not allowed to officiate your wedding, right? The minute that, I'm allowed to, and somebody calls up Alan and says, Alan, if you don't make the rabbi do this wedding, I'm going to quit the shul, right? Now, I know you, Alan, you would say, well, that's unfortunate, but it's his choice, right? But that pressure becomes hard to withstand after a while, right? And so having this as an official policy, to me, takes the pressure off of the individual rabbi. All right, now, prediction. I think this policy will change. Second prediction, I think this policy will not change before I retire. Third prediction, I don't think it will split the movement. Just like egalitarianism didn't, just like LGBT didn't. I mean, I think that, there'll be the conservative move, but I actually don't think it will. But I have to say that, to me, my reason for not wanting to officiate has to do with the integrity of what I do as a rabbi. In other words, I'm not a clerk of the court, right? I did not get ordained to sign civil pieces of paper. I got ordained to do Jewish things for Jews, right? And so, and the problem, in other words, I think if it were feasible for me to officiate at a marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew, and during the ceremony say, Judaism does not recognize this as a marriage, okay? But because I like these people and I wish them well, I am officiating at this ceremony as an officer of the state of Maryland, not as a rabbi. If I could do that, I think I would. But that's not what they want, right? I mean, what couple getting married would want me to get up there and say, I'm not doing this as a rabbi, I'm doing this as a court clerk, right? I'm doing this, and I may even throw in some Hebrew, but it's not a valid Jewish ceremony. It's not what they want, right? So, I just can't do that with any integrity, right? So, so I won't, but, because I just don't see any way to really give the couple what they want and also have my own integrity as a rabbi and a human being. So I'm going to start here. I know I've said a lot. I always say a lot. I wish other people would say more. So say more. All right. Questions, comments, rebuttals, demurs, partial concurrences. Yeah, Mike.
So, I mean, your presentation was the history of the bureaucracy, and that's interesting, and it's certainly non-controversial because you made a point. You said it was history, but if the question is important substantively, what are we doing about it? We had a guy come here a whole lot of years ago from the men's club in the sky, whatever they call their national or regional something or other.
Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs.
Yeah. And they came to talk to our men's club about being welcoming. And he made his pitch, and my reaction then remains. It's not like I don't want to be welcoming. Of course, we should be welcoming if they are married and they are mixed, whatever their situation is. Somebody walks in the door and somebody's Jewish, they should be welcome.
Right.
But what are we doing to stop the flow out of Jewish couples standing together under a chuppah? What are we doing? I mean, when I was a kid, this did not, I don't believe this fell to the shuls to deal with, except, as you say, bureaucratically, but it was the family, the extended family. And if one of my cousins intermarried, he risked expulsion from the extended family. And people knew that, and it was a built-in impediment. It's one of the things that stopped people from thinking about intermarriage. Other families, the person could not date other than a Jew. So that was a family rule. It was not a shul rule, but it was part of the culture of the time as a Jew in America. And I believe that was brought here untouched from the old country, was that's what you're supposed to do. I asked Rabbi Raphael at the time, so what are we doing? What are we teaching? And he said to me, there's no way, Jose. If I taught that, I'd have a riot on my hands. People would quit en masse.
Right.
I would teach kids, and the kids would raise their hands and say, but you're talking about my mommy and daddy.
Absolutely.
And so it would sound like the barn door is open. And so his position at the time was, it's way beyond whatever you're thinking, Mike. And he may well have been right, and he may still be right. Without question, it's a very sensitive subject. You called this a controversy, and for good cause. But
well, look, I mean, no, he's undoubtedly right. I mean, if you want me to give you Rabbi Arian's 5-part prescription for preventing intermarriage, okay, have an observant home, send your kid to a day school, okay? Do not let your kid go to a college other than, say, Yeshiva University or Brandeis or maybe Columbia or Penn. Optimally, don't teach your kid English, okay? I mean, it can't be done. The sociology has changed, okay? I mean, I'll tell you 2 quick stories, okay? So in Norwich, I don't know, for some reason, people were fetching and bemoaning the state of the synagogue. And somebody said, you know, when we were teenagers, the shul was the focus of our life, and we came here every Saturday night. And I said, because you didn't have any non-Jewish friends. And well, yeah, I guess that's true, okay? They didn't, okay? Society was much more segregated and stratified, okay? And similarly, you know, when my dad, Zichrono Livracha, when he was single, okay, between the time that he divorced my mom and he met his second wife, he asked me one day, he said, how would you feel if I married somebody who wasn't Jewish? And I laughed uproariously. And he said, what's so funny? And I said, that would be a really neat trick, Dad. You don't know anybody who's not Jewish. right? Which was basically true. Okay, and my dad was not observant in the least, but he lived in Brooklyn and then Queens in an entirely, right? I mean, here is Arian's first rule of sociology, okay? Your kid will never marry a person that they do not meet, right? And society has changed, right? I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is, right? I mean, you know, right? Bill and Hillary Clinton, Jewish son-in-law, right? Donald Trump, Jewish son-in-law, Jewish convert daughter, right? Joe Biden, all three of his kids married Jews. Okay, I mean, it's a different world. Okay, so to expect that those norms, in other words, I just don't see how you can do it. I think it's a losing proposition. And therefore, you know, having said that, look, I think frankly, and this will still be controversial, the more dedicated you are to leading a Jewish life, the less likely you are to marry a non-Jew, right? I think that is true. I mean, you know, for example, I mean, people still sometimes assume that Kelly converted in order to marry me, okay, which frankly pisses me off, right? Because I would never, as a conservative rabbi, date a non-Jewish woman, right? Kelly was Jewish for 10 years before we met. She didn't convert because of me. She converted because of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, right? But people assume that, right? And like I say, to me, I mean, that is almost an insulting assumption to both of us, but that's what people assume. Okay, Alan, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, you know, Rabbi, I go back to the story you like to tell about the scouts, and they went out and they said, these people have fortified cities, they're up on, they have walls, we're not gonna be able to breach that. And your point was at the time, and is when you tell the story, the walls show that you have an insecurity. When you
Right.
have walls, when you need stuff like that, you're worried.
Right.
And to some extent, I think we need to think in that way. And I realize we won't, and we won't in my lifetime, but it's like water over rock. I mean, there is an erosion here, and it's gone, and it's gone, and it's gone. I think that if our message from the synagogue, from the people we are, from what we communicate, and if the biblical ideas that we have are worth it, the people would be interested. They're not going to be interested if somebody says, well, I'd love to marry you, but I just can't because it's against their rules. If you want the people in there to come in and see that we have a good product, then that's different. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that I grew up here in Gaithersburg, and we were the Jewish family for a while, and I dated non-Jews and ended up with a Jewish woman, and I'm happy we did. But we developed values. We developed the core things that you need to have in order to make Judaism worthwhile. It's not form over substance. And we can talk about how many angels fit on the head of a pin, and whether you can sit in the back row or whether you have to sit in a window or whether you have to sit a block away. But the fact is, if we want to strengthen as a group, if we don't want the exodus that we're having from our synagogue and other organized religion, then I think the thing is to work on our message. Just my opinion.
I completely agree. I mean, I just think, that's a beautiful application of the point that I make about the spies and the walls. is that, I think erecting walls is a sign of fear. I mean, it's like, when it came time for me to decide where to go to college, right? My two choices were Brandeis and Georgetown. Okay. Fairly wide divergence between the two, right? And, I said that, my Jewishness is secure enough for me to go to Georgetown. I don't need to go to Brandeis to preserve my Jewish identity. I mean, and little did I know that the experiences at Georgetown would detour me from law school to rabbinical school, right? So it turned out to be a fortuitous choice, but I think you're right. I mean, if you are secure in who you are, you don't need to be afraid to encounter difference, right? Fear of encountering difference to me, is a sign of insecurity. And I just think it's ultimately bound to be unsuccessful, right? And somebody pointed out to me, the Amish practice of Rumspringa, right? Where they force their kids to leave the community for 6 months to a year, right? So that the kids are there because they have made an affirmative choice that that's what they want to do, right? I mean, it shows a tremendous amount of security in their lifestyle. I don't know, it's interesting. All right, it's late, so I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much. Great discussion. I really appreciate everybody being here.
Oh.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.